Hi, and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Billy Thomas, and we both work at the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And, you know, we've got everything today from woodlands to pests to some sweet topics.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's show, and thanks everyone for joining us. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, use the comment section. And if you're on Zoom, you can use the chat pod and we can communicate with you there. But Renee, today is going to be a really good show. We got Dr. Jacob Muller back with us talking about woodland management practices here in Kentucky. We got Dr. Ellen Crocker talking about a pesky plant that you want to keep an eye out for. Laurie's going to be here with our tree of the week. And I want to give a short presentation about the Kentucky Maple Syr Project that we're working on and some of the events we have upcoming. So it'll be a great show. Thank you all for being with us.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started since we have a full lineup. Dr. Muller, hi, how are you today?
Hey, Renee and Billy.
Hey, Jacob.
Well, it's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what you're going to talk about today.
Well, I'm going to be talking about woodland management, some of the practices that are common in Kentucky, and it's a condensed version of what we discussed at the Woodland Owner Short Course. And so if some of these topics spark your interest or you want to know more about them, I would encourage you to go check that out. And I know that we've got some of those recordings available if Billy can lead you to those if you do need to access those. So, okay. So woodland management practices, right? So we're going to start off not jumping right into the treatments, but talking a little bit about why we manage our forests and kind of build some of that context for the treatments. And so we need to know some background information for why we're implementing this treatment under these circumstances, or a different treatment under another set of circumstances. And so it's important that we have some of that context when we're deciding how to manage our woodlands, right? But let's kind of jump back a little bit and define what we're really talking about, right? We're talking about silviculture. Okay? Silviculture is kind of made up of two Latin words, silva and culture. Silva is forested trees, right? And culture we know is to grow, but it's a little bit more complex than that. It's ultimately the art and science of growing and tending our forests. And this includes all sorts of strategies and techniques related to regeneration, improving the growth and character and form of trees in order to meet some management objectives. And so we use different silvicultural tactics and treatments to help us get to our goals, right? Okay. So silviculture, often what we think about when we talk about silviculture is a set of treatments, right? And we might only know a handful of different treatments, but oftentimes those treatments are part of a larger plan, a management plan. So some of those treatments include what we'll talk about today, some crop tree release, different mid-story removal, which is part of a larger system, part of a prescription. So a silvicultural prescription is a series of actions and a set of plans that take us from where we're currently at, and then we have these silvicultural treatments, and hopefully it helps get us to where our goals are in the future. Okay. You're going to hear me talk about stands, forested stands. Right? In forestry, this is a common unit for management. Right? It's an area with similar productivity and forest structure, similar species composition, right? And our silvicultural prescriptions are based at that stand level. Okay? When we look at a landscape, here's just a little figure. You can see those contour lines, those are elevational gradients, but this is a little watershed, just as an example. And there's distinctive qualities at different parts of this watershed or this hillside that create unique conditions, growing conditions. And so we can identify those unique qualities and delineate stands based on that. And that's how we think about the unit for our management, right? And so when we use the term stand, we might just be talking about this little area of the watershed here, which has similar site quality. The trees grow similarly on this particular site, similar type soils, and overall similar structure. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about a stand. Okay. Down lower, we get to the species level. Okay, so we manage at the stand level, but we're thinking about how different species grow. And this is a really important consideration when we're talking about woodland management, understanding the different species that are present, as well as the species that we want to manage for in the future, the species that we want to promote into the future. Okay, different trees have different requirements for regeneration and growth. They have different preferences. They might grow better under one condition or grow better under a completely different condition. And oftentimes we separate these based on their tolerance to light. And we call this shade tolerance. So species that are shade tolerant, these are species that really like to grow underneath the canopy of a tree, in the shade of the canopy. On the other end of the spectrum, we have shade intolerant tree species. And these are species that love sunlight, right? So they want to grow, they grow best when the canopy is opened up and they've received sunlight. Okay, and this is an important consideration when we think about the species that we have in our woodlands. Certain species that are tolerant of shade, those include our beeches, maple, hickories. On the other end, those intolerant of shade, those that like full sunlight, is yellow poplar, walnut, cherry, and then kind of right in between is our oaks, and we call these intermediate shade tolerant. So they kind of like a little bit of sunlight, but they grow best when the canopy is partially open. And these are important considerations for how we manage the stand and what species that we think about when we're managing, right? So intact canopies create lower light levels and they promote tolerant species. Okay, so when we have an unmanaged stand that has a really dense forest canopy, we're going to see species in the understory that like shade, right? When we open up the canopy, we're promoting those species that like the full sunlight, and they're better able to compete with other species, right? So they use those resources to their advantage. Okay. Here's just kind of a little cartoon when we're looking at sunlight and the structure of the forest. So in this example, we've got mainly a closed canopy. So in the understory, we're going to see likely more species that have regenerated are species that do well in the shade, right? We call these shade tolerant. That's how they regenerate. When we open up the stand, we give those species such as poplar, walnut, and oaks to a certain degree a competitive advantage, right? But there's so many implications and so many nuances to this process of opening up the canopy and promoting a species. And that's why we have these different silvicultural treatments, these woodland management practices that we prescribe for our management to help us think about which species to promote, which species to try to limit in regenerating and recruiting into the canopy. And so we have these two broad types of treatments for silviculture. We have intermediate treatments and what we call regeneration treatments, regeneration harvests, right? And these are two distinct stages for woodland management. One, the intermediate treatments is really designed to culture the trees, to take care of them, to help promote the trees that we want and help them grow better and bigger and ultimately more valuable, whether that value is for wildlife or for timber products. Right? And then we've got our regeneration treatments. Okay? And this includes treatments removing the overstory to help promote a new cohort of trees, right? You're saying that this forest has reached maturity, whether it's economic maturity or that the trees are starting to decline. We know that it's time to think about, it's probably time to think about regenerating a lot sooner than that, but regenerating the stand so that we have a healthy new cohort that's ready to come up into the forest when we remove the overstory. And so those are kind of the two broad categories for management. We think about regeneration treatment during the mature stage of the forest, and we think about intermediate treatments kind of all along the way, right? We can do all sorts of silvicultural treatments to help get the stand to where it needs to be to meet our management objectives. Okay. So culture trees, and that leads to healthy forest that when it's time to regenerate the forest, we're in prime condition to meet those management objectives and meet our goals. Okay. Generally, we think about treatments, intermediate treatments occurring earlier on, anywhere from 10 to 80 years, and regeneration treatments we're thinking about later on when the forest is mature and ready to be harvested. Okay, so we'll finish here talking briefly about a few of these examples, and if you're interested in knowing more information, be sure to check out the Woodland Owner Short Course video on woodland management practices. Right, so forests aren't all the same, right? They start off in different conditions, growing conditions. Some have had past management, some have had disturbances that create openings or clearings in the forest. Some are mature and dense and ultimately really unhealthy forests. So depending on where the forest is at, that will help lead us down a path of silvicultural practices to meet that. But some of the common practices that we see here in Kentucky, given that a lot of our forests in the area and in the state have been unmanaged for quite a while, right? And a lot of woodlands, we've kind of taken this passive approach where we haven't actively been out in the forest managing it. And so we have to do a few treatments to help get it to an area that's healthy and help it function better before we think about removing that overstory. Right. One of the more common practices that we see is a treatment called crop tree release. And really, this is kind of one of the more straightforward practices that we think about. Right. We have a closed canopy forest, and we know that we want to focus and promote a certain individual tree. Right. We do that by managing the trees around that. So we identify a tree that looks healthy and vigorous. It's got characteristics and qualities that we want to encourage to continue to develop. And we manage that by removing trees that are essentially competing with sunlight for that tree. Okay, so we remove the trees around that particular tree. And here's kind of another example of that. Where we're removing the trees, you can see those little stumps. We're not necessarily removing the trees below that because those aren't directly affecting that crop tree's space. Okay, and so here you can see kind of a cartoon looking straight down. We've identified the crop trees in a green shading, and so we're going to release those crop trees from competitors. Right? Whoops, going backwards. Okay, so here's pre-treatment, identified the crop trees, and then crop tree release. Okay, so we've left these crop trees in a great position to be able to grow more freely and have a lot more space and resources in order to continue to help us achieve our goals, whether that's wildlife or timber, anything that creates more healthy individual trees is what this treatment is about. And I'm going to jump ahead here. I'm going to wrap up here just in a minute, but I want to emphasize that when we're thinking about woodland management, it's always important to always be thinking about the next cohort of trees, the regeneration of the forest. Before we do anything in the overstory, before we remove trees, we need to think about what's going to be growing up, because if we open those trees up, and we think about the shade tolerance and how that influences species growth, we might be doing things in the forest that are going to have unintended consequences. So really what we're thinking about here is managing for light and space when we're talking about silvicultural treatments. Okay. The last treatment I'm going to briefly mention is one that's common to a regeneration treatment called a shelter wood, but one component of that is a mid-story removal, where we're removing this middle layer here of the forest in order to help promote those little seedlings down on the bottom of this little cartoon here. And so mid-story removal, we're removing those in order to help create a cohort of species that we're interested in promoting. Oftentimes those are oak species, getting rid of more competitive shade tolerant species in order to help promote those species we want. When we open up the canopy, then those are in a much better competitive position to be recruited into the next cohort. Okay, so that's kind of a little example of pre and post overstory removal. A lot of times we use different silvicultural tools to remove those mid-story, and hack and squirt being a very common way of easily going through and removing those mid-story non-desirable or unacceptable growing stock trees, as well as girdling those. So that was a real quick rundown. It's really tough to try to describe a topic like woodland management in 15 minutes or so. And I think hopefully this is just an introduction that helped you think about how you can get started. And I'll mention that the first place to start is always contacting a forester. KDF is a great resource. They can help you come out and start thinking about managing your woodlands. So.
Well, great. Thank you very much for that presentation. And, you know, I was wondering, does the practices or treatments that you do, is that based on the site that you're living on or where the trees actually live?
Yeah. I mean, I think it ultimately depends on like site productivity. So different sites grow better than other sites. Mm-hmm. And that's going to really help you decide what sort of treatments that you're going to focus on. If you have a really high productivity site, you might think that's a great thing, but actually it might be a little bit more difficult to grow oak trees because you're going to have all those other trees that also are going to be being very competitive in those sites, where if you have a lower quality site, you might actually have a better chance at recruiting oak that can outcompete some of the other species that would otherwise compete. So.
Well, that makes sense. Well, thank you very much for presenting today.
Yeah. So Jacob, you just covered an entire semester worth of content in 15 minutes. So.
Good to go.
Yeah.
You're really good at this. Also.
I don't know.
No, that's cool.
Some of it's stuck. So.
Hey, no, it's good. And like you said, ultimately you got to work with your forester because each property is a little bit different, and and what you're trying to do may be a little bit different. But I think you've done a great job of kind of demystifying some of these practices and why we do the things that we do. So that's great.
Definitely. Yeah. All right. Well,
appreciate you, Jacob.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
So we're moving on to a very sweet topic.
Yes, we are. And I'm really delighted to be talking about this project. It's the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project. And Renee, I'm going to go ahead and get sharing that right now.
All right.
Okay, so I want to talk about the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project, and this is an ongoing project that we have, and there are a number of people involved in this, and some of you all have been already participating in it, but for those that haven't, this will be an introduction as well as kind of an announcement of a number of different projects that we have upcoming. So let's go ahead and roll into that. First, I want to kind of let you know who the players are involved in this. Obviously, since I'm talking about it, we are involved, and there's several of us here at the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources that are involved in this maple syrup project. I think I counted about 6 or 7 of us just the other day as I was thinking through it. We also have numerous county extension agents, some of which are on this meeting right now with us, that are a big part of this. And actually, they were really some of the early drivers to even have this Kentucky Maple Syrup Project. Kentucky 4-H is actively involved. We've got a number, in addition to 4-H agents, we have the 4-H office. Miss Ashley Osborne is taking the lead on developing some curriculum for maple syrup production for our 4-Hers here in Kentucky, along with a big team of others engaged in 4-H programming. So we're excited about that. But really, probably as important as any of these other groups is the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association. Here's a couple of families that are members of that association at their sugar shacks making maple syrup, and and it's a wonderful, wonderful product. And if you haven't ever tasted Kentucky maple syrup, please go out and get some if you can find it. That's one of the challenges with maple syrup production here in Kentucky. We can't make enough. Every drop that gets made is quickly sold, so that's part of the impetus for being involved in this project as well. Along those lines, we also have the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development that is a player with this. They bring a lot of business expertise and planning to help our producers be efficient in their business operations. We also have a lot of support from the USDA Agricultural Marketing Services. This is a funding agency that is supporting some of the work that we're doing here, supporting the work of the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association, as well as what the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development is doing with these projects. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. They are an important player. They are funding 2 of our projects on maple syrup production. We're trying to get at the economics of maple syrup production, but we're also trying to get out the forest management implications of maple syrup production. What can we do to enhance production here in Kentucky? So that work is ongoing. But ultimately, it's these Kentucky maple syrup producers and landowners that we have here in Kentucky that we're trying to support and help. Again, this is a very exciting project that we're all part of, and there's room for more. So, one of the things we're trying to do with this project is build a community. So what is the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project? Well, first, it's about collaboration. Really, it is a bunch of entities coming together to try to support and help this industry here in Kentucky. It is in its kind of fledgling stages, if you will, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And really what we're trying to do is build a community. We really think that there is strength in this community building. And that's one of the things that the Cooperative Extension Service prides itself on, is building communities with shared interests, especially when it comes to our forests and natural resources, at least from our department. That's an important thing that we try to work on. And it also plays an important role in rural development. You'll see here in a moment how many maple trees we have in Kentucky, and there are a whole lot. And that's a resource, and that resource can be a big part of enriching some of these communities. It presents a lot of agritourism and a lot of other tourism related options and opportunities. This is a picture of Savage Farms up in Lawrence County, and they are doing a lot of different work up there, but this was on their Kentucky Maple Day a few years ago. Brings a lot of people out. So this all kind of blends into, really, this is sustainable agricultural and forestry work. We have seen over basically centuries, some of these trees have been tapped in New England area for years and years. So if you do it right, you can tap these trees really for a very, very long time. So it can be a good use of our forest and natural resources. And it's also about education and sharing. You know, there has been a lot of history of maple syrup production in Kentucky, as well as other places in the world. Certainly you think of New Hampshire and Vermont and some of those areas as being the heart, and Canada as well as the maple syrup. But we have been doing it here in Kentucky for a long time too. Native Americans were doing it a long time before European settlers got here. So this is not a new thing. And, you know, but it is kind of a thing that was a little bit lost for a while. So it's a great way to kind of share that heritage and that legacy. And really, it helps us to increase our connection to the land, right? Because we need to have an intimate knowledge and working understanding of the land and what it can provide. And this maple syrup production gives us a chance to really strengthen our connection as a community to the land. Another great thing about maple syrup production is often the work occurs during kind of the winter, the downtime, if you will, with other agricultural operations. Basically, December through February or so is kind of the peak season of activity. So it comes at a really nice time in the year as well. And really, well, it's a great opportunity to celebrate a sweet, untapped resource here in Kentucky. And as I'll show you here in a second, we've got a lot of maple trees in Kentucky. So let's talk real briefly about the maple resources. We are fortunate that the Kentucky Division of Forestry, in partnership with the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, does some forest inventory analysis for us on an ongoing basis. So the numbers I'm showing you are from that data that they've collected of the trees here in Kentucky. So starting off with sugar maple, there are over 701 million sugar maples in Kentucky, and that's trees greater than 1 inch in size. Now, we can't tap trees that small. Typically, you need to be at least 10 inches. The way they break their data down, they break it down into kind of an 11-inch up category. So if you look at just that 11-inch category and up, we're looking at over 33 million sugar maples that are tappable in Kentucky right now. That's a lot of trees. That's a lot of maple sap. Another important species that we have here in Kentucky is red maple. And while it may not have the same sugar content as sugar maple, it does have maple sugar in it. So it's a great opportunity to use this abundant resource. And if you just looked at the pure numbers of seedlings out there and trees of any species, red maple is the highest. We have nearly 900 million red maple trees out there in Kentucky greater than 1 inch. So that's a lot of trees. But if you just look at the ones that are of a tappable size in this data set, we're looking at nearly 30 million. Another tree that you may not think of, it's in the maple family, but it can also be tapped, is box elder. It is part of the maple group. And in Kentucky, we have about 76 million total, and a little over 3.5 million are of a tappable size. So when you bring those numbers together, you know, we're looking around over 66 million trees in Kentucky that can be tapped right now. 66 million. That's a lot of trees. So there's a lot of opportunity for maple syrup production here in the state of Kentucky. So that leads me to letting you all know about some upcoming workshops that are being put on as part of this Kentucky Maple Syr Project. And again, I mentioned all the players, and they're all heavily involved in these workshops. Starting out on September 14th, we're going to have an evening workshop called Sugaring in the South, Maple Syrup in Kentucky. And there we're going to have some folks. We're going to have Dr. Abby Vandenberg, who is with the University of Vermont, and she's going to be talking about some of the national trends in maple syrup. So that'll be a really interesting insight at a larger scale. Then we'll be talking about the maple trees in Kentucky and about some of the demand for that product that I'd mentioned earlier. And then we're going to kind of go over real briefly the maple tapping process, try to demystify how we get that sap out of the tree and turn it into a wonderful product, like you see here in the image. And then we've been having for the last couple of years, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture runs a maple syrup a competition, if you will, at the state fair. So we're going to have Miss Kimberly Fields with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture is going to be joining us, and she'll be revealing the winners of the 2021 state fair regarding maple syrup. So that'll be a great time. So please make plans to join us in the evening on September 14th. Next, we have the upcoming maple syrup toolbox. So maple syrup toolbox. So this is a chance to really dig a little bit deeper into the maple syrup syrup production process. This is going to happen on October 14th. Again, another evening program. And from there, we're going to be talking about how you go about selecting your sugar bush. That's the area where you're going to collect the sap. And we're going to get into a little bit deeper into the actual tapping process and that collection. There's some things that can really increase the efficiency of how much sap we can get out of those trees, such as vacuuming, vacuum tubing, and reverse osmosis. So we'll talk about those. We'll talk about some of the ways that maple syrup can be marketed beyond just the bottle, and it can be added to a lot of different products. So that'll be an interesting insight into what you can do with that product. And then we'll have some information about some of the support that's available for maple syrup producers or those that are interested in getting involved in maple syrup production. And then on the 23rd of October, we have currently planned an in-person visit to the Davis family farm in Greene County. Mr. David Davis down there is a really interesting, awesome gentleman who is willing to open up his farm for us to have a in-person field day. He's got a little sugar bush right near his sugar house, so we'll be able to go and check out how he's tapping trees and how he's collecting that sap. Then we'll come in and be able to see what's going on in his operation. And then we're going to have a few other producers there as well to try to have a little panel discussion. So it'll be a really good time if you're interested in learning about maple syrup production. You want to see if it's something that you might want to try. Learning from some of these people who have been doing it for a while is a great way to jumpstart your knowledge and maybe help you avoid some of the common issues that people run into. So please sign up for that as well. And then we're going to wrap up our maple syrup programming, at least these educational programming for 2021 on November 6th. And that's another in-person program scheduled for the Letcher County Extension Office. And this is our Kentucky Maple School. And again, we're bringing in Dr. Abby Vandenberg in person for that event. She's going to be our keynote speaker. She actually has family here in Kentucky, so she's really excited about getting back to Kentucky. But we're excited to have her and some of her work. She works with Proctor Maple Center, so and that's like the premier place where they do a lot of maple syrup research here in the U.S. So we'll be learning about that. We'll have some representatives from the Kentucky Maple Syrup Association there having some talks. We'll hear some of the other programs and opportunities that are available for maple producers. We're also going to try to attract some vendors in so you can see some of this equipment. So these are some really good opportunities if you're interested. And I'll kind of wrap up with encouraging you to visit our Kentucky Maple Syr Project website. I'll put that address in there and I'll drop it into the chat pod here in a few moments. But we also recently started a Kentucky Maple e-news. So this will be a periodic e-newsletter that will come out, and it'll give you all the latest and up-to-date information regarding maple syrup activities and what's going on with the Kentucky Maple Syr Project. And one final note I will leave you, go ahead and grab your calendar right now. I'm about to drop a date on you that you need to mark down, and that date is February 5th in 2022. That's the first Saturday in February, and that is when we're going to have the Kentucky Maple Day. So we'll have more information about that, but go ahead and mark your calendars now for this super sweet opportunity. So please join us and be part of the Kentucky Maple Syrup Project. There's plenty of room and we welcome you.
Yeah, Billy, I was shocked to learn how many trees there are out there that you could actually tap, and that there's different kinds. So that was interesting to find that out.
Yeah, it is really kind of shocking when you think over 66 million trees are available to tap. And Renee, you can tap really any tree though, right? We can tap black walnut, and they do that. They tap pecan, they tap sycamore. All these trees have some sugar in their sap. Right, sugar maple just happens to have the most, so we use that. And it also has a wonderful maple flavor that's really wonderful. But you can tap really any tree. It's just a matter of how much sap or how much sugar is in that sap. So it's pretty interesting. It really is.
And I don't know if, hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot, but I know you had given some statistics on how many trees it takes to actually make a small jug of sap. Do you have that off the top of your head?
I do. And really, it all comes down to the sugar content, right? So every tree is not exactly the same, right? You may have two sugar maples standing right beside one another, and one may be twice as sweet as the other. So it's going to vary a little bit. But typically what we think is if you're tapping sugar maples, it's going to take about 40 gallons of sap to equate to 1 gallon of syrup. If you do red maple, typically it's a little less sweet. So you're talking around 60 to 65 gallons of sap to get 1 gallon of syrup. So if you wonder why maple syrup's expensive, you got to get rid of a lot of water, right?
That was my point.
Right. They have to transport and tap and bring all that water along with that little bit of sugar in there, and then they have to evaporate off that water. So it is a very involved process. It's not complicated, but it is involved, and there are ways that you can mess it up really quickly. So you want to make sure you're doing it the right way, and that's why some of these workshops gives you a chance to learn from some others. Learn from some of these common mistakes. It'll make your experience all the better.
Well, thank you for giving us that presentation. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll drop those links in the chat pod here in a moment for everybody.
All right. And speaking of more trees, we have our tree of the week. Hi, Lori.
Hey, how are you all today?
Good. What are we talking about today?
Well, today I realized, I hadn't done anything from the Salix genus. So I wanted to talk about willow. And it is, we do have numerous in the state, but this is the only willow that really grows to tree sizes and is of commercial importance, and that's the black willow. So I won't say any more because it's all in the video.
All right, sounds great. Looking forward to it.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the black willow. Black willow, Salix nigra, is the largest and the only commercially important willow of about 90 species native to North America. It is more distinctly a tree throughout its range than any other native willow. It is also known as swamp willow, Gooding willow, southwestern black willow, and Dudley willow. It is short-lived, typically living 40 to 100 years, and it is fast-growing, with maximum size and development in the lower Mississippi River Valley and bottomlands of the Gulf Coastal Plain, where trees can reach 100 feet and up to 20 inches in diameter. However, trees typically grow 30 to 60 feet tall with an average 14-inch diameter. Trees tend to have a broad, irregular crown and a dense root system. Black willow is used for a variety of wood products and has been widely used for stabilizing eroding lands due to its dense root system. Black willow's range is from New Brunswick to Manitoba and south to Florida and west to Texas, and it's found all across Kentucky. It is usually found on moist or wet soils along banks of streams, lakes, and swamps, and around farm ponds. Black willow is classified as very shade intolerant, and the trees are often found in pure stands. It is considered a pioneer or early successional species of sites. Black willow can be confused with the non-native invasive crack willow, Salix fragilis, where their ranges overlap. Crack willow is native to southwestern Asia and central Europe. In Kentucky, crack willow only has been documented in 5 or 6 counties. The leaves of crack willow are usually whitish beneath as compared to black willow that are not. Black willow is a deciduous tree with alternately arranged simple leaves. The leaves are lance-shaped, 3 to 6 inches long and pinnately veined, meaning the veins run parallel from the midrib to the leaf edge. The margins are finely serrated, and they are dark green and somewhat shiny above and light green on the underside, and fall leaf color is a golden yellow. This species is dioecious, meaning male flowers and female flowers are on separate trees. The male and female flowers are tiny and look very similar. They are borne in slender catkins that are about 1 to 3 inches long and yellowish green in color. They bloom in early spring with leaf out or just following leaf out. The flowers are pollinated by insects, particularly bees, and somewhat by wind. The fruit are cone-shaped capsules and hanging catkins. Each capsule contains many very small cottony seeds. At maturity, the capsules split, and that's usually around midsummer, to release the cottony seeds. It is estimated that there are 2 to 3 million seeds to the pound. The seeds are wind dispersed with silky cottony hairs acting like wings to carry the seeds long distances. Seeds are also water dispersed due to the tree's common location. Trees begin seed production at about 10 years of age, with optimum seed production between 25 and 75 years. Trees typically had good seed crops every year, with rare failures due to late freezes. Black willow will also commonly root and stump sprout. The bark is brown to gray to nearly black. It is divided into deep fissures that separate thick, interlacing, and sometimes scaly ridges. The wood is light and usually straight-grained. The heartwood is reddish or grayish-brown, and sometimes with darker streaks. The sapwood is white to tan, but there's not always a clear demarcation from the heartwood. The wood is rated as non-durable to perishable. It is moderately high in shock resistance and was once used for artificial limbs. Black willow is moderately important tree for wildlife. The buds and catkins are eaten by a variety of birds, including ruffed grouse, white-throated sparrow, mallards, and northern pintail. Deer eat the twigs and leaves, while beaver feed on the wood and use the branches in the construction of their dams. Rusty grackle, yellow warbler, and the warbling vireo will use the willows for their nest sites, and yellow-bellied sapsuckers feed on the sap from holes they peck through the bark. Willow flowers also provide nectar and pollen for a variety of bees, including honeybees and bumblebees. Willows are also an important larval host for a variety of butterflies, including eastern tiger swallowtail, the mourning cloak, the red-spotted purple, the viceroy, and the eastern comma. Supporting the larva also benefits many insect-eating birds. Black willow wood is and has been used for boxes and crates as a furniture core, turned pieces, charcoal, and pulp. It's a favorite for soil stabilization due to its dense root system. The national champion black willow as of 2021 is in Washington, Minnesota. It is 315 inches in circumference, 91 feet tall, with a 75-foot crown spread. There is currently no champion listed for Kentucky. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out American Forest National Champion Trees, and check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about black willow. Ancient pharmaceutical texts listed the bark and the leaves of willow as a treatment for rheumatism and the pain associated with it. Glucoside salicin was isolated from willow in 1829, and it is today the basic ingredient of aspirin, salicylic acid. However, today salicylic acid is synthesized rather than extracted. Black willow is appropriately named for the dark brown to blackish bark. The scientific genus name Salix is from the Latin or the Celtic sal and lis and means near water. The species name nigra means black, referring to the dark bark. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland local park or neighborhood and enjoy the beautiful trees of Kentucky, including the black willow.
You know, Lori, when I'm thinking of willows, I'm thinking typically the hanging where they're just swaying in the wind. That didn't look like that. Is that right?
It's a different species. That's a weeping willow. Black willow, it can get some of that depending on where it's growing, because it can be kind of shrubby, and then you would get more of that cascading sense. But what you're talking about is the weeping willow, which a lot of people love to plant in their yard. So, but no, black willow that's not necessarily one of its growth forms.
So do we have, I guess we have other willows in Kentucky then?
Yeah, we do. We have, according to Wharton and Barber, we have 8 different, which I didn't really realize this when I took dendrology. We have 8 different willows. Most of those are shrubby around here, and you'll even find black willow as more of a shrub, but they all tend to grow in similar habitats, kind of very wet, moist soils, with the exception there's an upland willow, which can grow in drier soil. So, but it's more of a shrub. So.
Interesting.
Very cool. And Renee, I was going to say, you gave me a childhood flashback when you said about the weeping willow. I remember my mother would make us go get our switches off of the tree.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't a good flashback.
Thanks a lot, Renee.
I apologize.
Traumatizing me. No, Lori, really love it. I love these. I pick up something every week from your trees of the week. So thank you for doing these. They're really good.
Yeah, well, like I said, I say this every week. I learn something new and I get to refresh, and it's great. So I enjoy it.
Excellent.
So moving on, we have pesky plants in our way. Huh?
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's just too many pesky plants out there, Dr. Crocker.
Oh, there's always something new, right?
Yes.
So this week I'm going to be telling you about a newer invasive plant. I mean, it's not new. It's been in Kentucky since the 80s at least, but it seems to be increasing, and that is Japanese chaff flower. And the presentation I'm doing today is kind of related to a Japanese chaff flower summit that was hosted a few weeks ago. We had an online conference hosted by University of Illinois, and then we had a field day, including a field day at the site that you're going to be seeing at the Daniel Boone National Forest. And so for anybody who's interested in learning more about this, I'll also put a link in the chat to that Japanese chaff flower summit. They've got the recordings to all of that available online.
Wonderful.
There's a new invasive plant that you should know about, and it's already causing problems. Japanese chaff flower can invade a wide range of habitats, and it grows rapidly, crowds out native species. It spreads easily by its seeds that stick into fur and fabric. In this edition of Pesky Plants, we'll learn a little bit about Japanese chaff flower, what it is, how to identify it, and how to manage it. Japanese chaff flower is a perennial herbaceous plant. So it has an extensive root system, and it sprouts up from that root system each year. It can get up to 3 to 5 feet tall, but it's going to die back down in the fall. Its leaves are opposite, and the margins are smooth. They don't have any kind of teeth or serrations, but they do have very prominent veins. You can see those veins. They almost make it look kind of like a dogwood or even a small basil plant. And the color of the leaves of the stems can really vary. Sometimes it's kind of reddish, sometimes it's more greenish. The stems are squarish, and the nodes where those kind of small branches and leaves attach can be inflated and swollen. At those nodes, it's especially common for them to have this reddish color, but not always. Really, some of these features are easy to confuse with some other plants, especially when they're small, but once they start to flower, they'll become more distinctive. So Japanese chaff flower will produce these bottle brush flowers. The flowers themselves aren't very noticeable. They're kind of small, green, but they form this spike. And when they're flowers, they're kind of in this small bottle brush spike, but as they mature and grow into seeds, that's going to elongate and become kind of stretched out. And really important in the case of Japanese chaff flower and its spread, each of those seeds has attached to it these stiff bracts that attach it to fur and clothing, make it really easy to unintentionally carry around because it's stuck. Those bracts are located on the backs of the seeds, which distinguishes it from some other plants. And when, late fall, winter comes, those leaves are going to die back down, but the stems with the seeds on them are going to remain through the fall, and you're able to spread it that time of year, but it's also pretty distinctive in this kind of light tan, almost yellowish color. As its name suggests, Japanese chaff flower is native to Asia, including parts of Japan. It was first detected in the United States in the 1980s in Kentucky, and since then it's spread all along the Ohio River. In Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, it is really abundant in those riparian areas right along the river, as well as in the floodplains nearby. So those seeds, when it floods, will be carried higher up into new areas. While it really likes moist soils and full sun or partial sun, it can also move into those more upland sites, as well as slightly more shady locations. It can invade in your woodlands, in your bottomlands, in your stream sides, in your roadsides, in ditches, in gardens, in landscapes, in agriculture areas, all sorts of different areas. As with any invasive plant, managing Japanese chafflower requires patience and persistence. Seeds are key to the establishment of Japanese chafflower. While it's perennial, that's how it's arriving, and those seeds are really easy to accidentally transport, either on yourself, animals, or equipment. So limit movement of people and equipment in infested areas when it's producing seed. If you know that there's an infestation nearby, make sure that you check for establishment of those seedlings. It's a lot easier to control when you just have a few seedlings popping up compared to when it's taken over. And in addition to us moving it around, our pets moving it around, our equipment moving around, deer and other animals can also move it. Occasional small plants and seedlings can be pulled up by the root system, but the root system breaks off pretty easily, and this is not going to be an effective strategy for larger plants. Mowing or cutting can be used to reduce that year's seed set, but plants can still produce seeds on the sprouts that pop up from that, and it's not going to kill the plant. Herbicide is typically used to kill that entire root system, and it can be used in combination with something like weed whacking or cutting, and then spraying the shoots that come up. There are lots of different herbicides out there that can be effective against Japanese chafflower. And keep in mind that for those foliar sprays, you want to do that when those plants are as small as possible to minimize the amount of herbicide you have to use. And also that Japanese chafflower likes to grow in areas, stream sides, riparian areas, where you want to match the herbicide that you're using to those sensitive habitats. In addition, a lot of the places that chafflower likes to grow, those stream sides, those edges, a lot of other invasive plants can grow there too. So be on the lookout, not just for chafflower, but that you have native plants filling in afterwards instead of invasives that you don't want to see. Thanks for joining me today and learning a little bit more about Japanese chafflower. If you'd like to learn more, make sure to find us online and follow us on social media. Thanks for doing your part to fight these invasive plants and promote the health of your woodlands.
Well, thanks, Ellen. We greatly appreciate you doing that. One thing I was wondering, you mentioned that it can be moved from deer, but do deer eat it?
Yes, so this is, most of our invasive plants, many of them deer are not terribly fond of, which is part of the problem, but deer will heavily graze chafflower. And you'll see, if you're in a dense stand of it, you'll see, the ends have all been kind of chewed off, but then the side kind of shoots will just sprout up, and it'll grow that way. In addition, it can still produce seeds even if it's pretty small. So from what I have heard and what I can tell, it doesn't seem like the deer are able to control it, but they will certainly be drawn to it, feed on it, carry the seeds around accidentally, both in their fur and probably also in mud on their hooves. So yeah, kind of a surprise there.
Is the seed still viable once it goes through their digestive system?
I don't know about that. Good question. It certainly can get stuck in all sorts of different things, and it's really abundant. And I think one of the reasons why we see it in these kind of stream side areas, I mean, it's definitely going to be floating downstream as well. And a big thank you to David Taylor at the Daniel Boone National Forest, who worked with me on a field day out there, as well as this video. So he hosted a great day to go look at some of this in person. And is doing a lot there to try to control it and educate people about it.
Ellen, it made me think of Japanese knotweed, at least in the same areas. It seems like there's a lot of overlap in the kind of habitats where you find those. So
yeah, and definitely areas you don't want to leave bare either, because you want some vegetation growing on these stream banks. Otherwise they could easily erode, which is the last thing that you want. But you also don't want these super dense invasive species. And I don't know if you could tell, but one of the photos that I showed was kind of on the side of the road. And one of the things that they suspected is that maybe people who were canoeing would kind of walk through that area pick up the seeds on them, and then you'd find it on the side of the roads where people would park, and at like visitor centers popping up there as well. So just another really good reminder to kind of, anytime you're out hiking or doing work in your woods, look at who might be hitchhiking along with you and try to minimize that spread of things, because you may or may not be able to get rid of, an infestation if it's near, right on the stream in this area that you really don't want to impact, but you can certainly stop it from spreading to new sites.
So where else in the state is it?
Well, the map I showed it just how problematic it was right on that Ohio River area, but it's popped up in a lot of other places, in addition to, the Daniel Boone National Forest and other spots. So it's something that I'd say everyone across the state should be on high alert for, even if you're not in that Ohio River area, keep an eye peeled for it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for
keeping us up to date on what's
Yes.
going on and
Yes.
the threat facing our woods.
And if you want to learn more, make sure to check out that Chaflower Summit online. Thanks for having me on today.
Great segment. Thank you, Ellen.
Well, Billy, we've covered a lot of ground today, literally.
And thank you all for hanging with us. Yeah, we covered a variety of topics, from woodland management practices to maple syrup activities, tree of the week, and then a new pest that we got to keep our eye out for. So yeah, big thanks to all of our guests and all of their great content and sharing. Big thanks to you all for being with us each week.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes you just go, oh, what was that they said? And we can easily help you with that. If you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, we have every episode we've ever done on there. So you can go back and watch them all. And it'll take you quite a bit if you rewatched all of them. So
yeah, check it out. Check out all those resources, and let other people know about this show. We think they would appreciate it, enjoy it as well. So
yeah. But until then, we are done for today, and we will see you next Wednesday at 11. Take care.
bye, everyone.